This is a map of the US and their maritime boundaries, and this is what they've just added onto it. To put this into numbers, the US has just expanded its territory by 386,000 square miles, an area the same size as Egypt, or over twice the size of California. It's America's most significant enlargement since buying Alaska in 1867, and yet most people haven't even noticed. If you're wondering how, it's because no shots were fired, no flags were raised, and no actual land was even gained. So how did they expand? Well, way out into the sea. For the first time ever, the US has declared the outer limits of their extended continental shelf, the portion of its coast beyond the 200 nautical miles they're automatically entitled to. To put these claims into perspective, the area in the Arctic here is by far the largest, representing the size of one California. The area in the Atlantic Ocean is slightly smaller than Michigan. The area in the Bering Strait is about the same size as Missouri. This area in the Pacific Ocean is the same size as Maryland. These two neighboring patches in the Gulf of Mexico add up to the size of Connecticut. And lastly, this small triangle by the Mariana Islands is equal in size to Hong Kong, or a third of Rhode Island. This declaration comes after the International Energy Agency reported that for the first time, global demand for fossil fuels will peak or plateau as the world transitions to renewable energy and clean technologies, dependent on critical earth minerals. These developments have important political implications in the short and long term, and they underscore a key area of geopolitical tension that could define the 21st century. A race to exploit natural resources through deep-sea mining between all nations, big and small, to see who will dominate the key commodities of our new technological age. Now, you may be thinking, how does a country simply claim a new piece of land, especially of this size? Well, it's an exercise in scientific and legal prowess that such a feat can be pulled off, and it shows how strategically the United States is making big moves in order to slow down the decline of their global dominance. But to understand this territory claim, we have to understand the international laws governing maritime borders. But first, I'd like to thank the sponsor of our video, War Thunder. Immerse yourself in battle through the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. With more than 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations to choose from, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. The possibilities of intense combat are truly endless. But not only is there a wide variety of vehicles to choose from, but each one is incredibly detailed, with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles. Not to mention, the authentic sound effects place you right at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time. And the craziest thing? This game is now available for free on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. So join the worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today, and dive right into the incredible combat of War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there's simply no game better suited for fans of military history. Sign up using my link in the video description below. Now, territorial waters are categorized into distinct zones, with each zone granting different rights and opportunities to a coastal state. These current maritime laws are outlined under the Third United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a monumental treaty ratified in 1994 by the majority of the world's nations. Under the provisions of it starts, I quote, "The sovereignty of a coastal state extends beyond its land territory to an adjacent belt of sea described as the territorial sea. The territorial sea extends up to 12 nautical miles from the coastal state's baseline, and the state exercises full sovereignty over these waters, which includes everything from the airspace above down to the seabed beneath it. They can do anything they want. The adjacent belt of sea extending from 12 to 24 nautical miles from baseline is known as the contiguous zone. In this territory, a state has jurisdiction over the ocean's surface and seabed, but not the airspace. They can enforce their own customs, including sanitary regulations or immigration laws, but they don't have the same control over this area as they do with the territorial sea. Then we have the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ for short, which extends up to 200 nautical miles off the coastal state's baseline. As the name suggests, the state has sovereign rights for the purpose of exploring, exploiting, managing and conserving natural resources on the seabed and the subsoil, just like in its other maritime zones. But they don't have the right to enforce customs and laws like they do in the previous areas. In addition to this, it awards them priority regarding marine scientific research and the ability to construct installations, such as artificial islands and other structures like oil rigs, as permitted under international law. Lastly, we have the extended continental shelf, which is what this US claim is all about. But what is a continental shelf in the first place? So it's the area of seabed around a large landmass where the sea is relatively shallow compared to the open ocean, like this. Then you see the continental slope or margin, the region of transition from the land to the deep seafloor. Now, this all may sound boring or even confusing, but it's all extremely relevant. See, the Convention on the Law of the Sea defines the continental shelf's boundary as the, quote, natural prolongation of the land territory on the continental margin's outer edge, or 200 nautical miles from the baseline, therefore mirroring the EEZ, whichever is farther. But if your natural prolongation, aka continental shelf, is longer, then you can claim up to 350 nautical miles from the baseline, in what is known as the Extended Continental Shelf, or ECS for short. This is what the US and really countless other nations have done. In the Extended Continental Shelf, you get the rights for the purpose of exploiting its natural resources on and below the seabed, but nothing more. It's the high seas where foreign states and vessels enjoy high seas freedom. Actually getting an ECS isn't easy at all though. You aren't automatically entitled to it like you are the first 200 nautical miles of ocean. It's a heavy process, requiring the coastal state to submit extremely detailed scientific evidence to justify their claims to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, or CLCS, which reviews the case and makes recommendations on the limits under the convention. I mean, it literally took the United States 2 decades before they were ready to submit their findings. It should be clear now why countries invest so much into the research and litigation behind the extension of their maritime boundaries. The rights to mine these areas are monumental. Now, there are plenty of conditions that can alter the areas of these outer zones, such as when 2 countries' territorial waters intersect, requiring bilateral agreements. But the important thing to understand is the basis of these maritime boundaries and the rights that each zone gives. The collaboration on the treaty has helped regulate the seas and has been essential for mediating conflict in highly contentious territorial disputes. Given that the international community has an interest in preserving the marine environment as well as maximizing economic opportunities, there needs to be a balance between territorial claims over areas rich in natural resources and environmental regulation of deep-sea mining that encourages sustainable practices and avoids ecological setbacks. Both of these concerns are addressed in it. This is all well and good. However, geopolitical competition arises especially from claims over the Extended Continental Shelf. This is because, as said before, the Extended Continental Shelf, while outside of the exclusive economic zone, still gives full mineral rights to the coastal state in question. So that brings us to the US and their new territorial expansion claims. By analyzing depth, shape, and geophysical characteristics of the seabed and subsoil, scientists can illuminate the geological structure of the continental margin and its relationship to the seabed's topography, using this data to prove their legal claims of expanded jurisdictional rights. This relationship between science and law was essential to the US territory claim. The US Continental Shelf Task Force spearheaded the research, which included 14 different federal agencies beginning in 2003 and costing tens of millions of dollars. All other Arctic Ocean coastal states, Russia, Canada, Norway, and Denmark via Greenland, have already made at least one submission to the UN, which really demonstrates how important it was that the US acts sooner rather than later in presenting their continental shelf boundaries. It's important to note too that the US still hasn't ratified the Convention on the Law of the Sea Treaty. Ronald Reagan originally praised many of the treaty's provisions, but he objected to ratification on the grounds that the convention would restrict or impede US rights to deep-sea mining. The Senate needs a 2/3 majority vote to ratify the treaty, but subsequent administrations still can't win enough seats to override this philosophy against multilateral agreements. In fact, the bill rarely even reaches the Senate floor because of this opposition. Now, this is important because while the US is somewhat adhering to the convention by way of their recent expansion, they still technically aren't confined to the boundaries of mining and resource exploitation prescribed by this particular UN treaty, which may have unknown geopolitical ramifications in the future if they continue to avoid ratification in the Senate, or if other member nations feel that they have rights to the same territory. Even the State Department's announcement regarding the Extended Continental Shelf was an ambiguous one, involving some weird phrasing, stating that they have prepared a submission to the CLCS, which they of course cannot officially file until they ratify the Law of the Sea Convention and become a member state. So basically, if they were ever part of the treaty, which may or may not happen in the future, then that would be their claim. They have said, however, that they are open to filing the submission as a non-party to the convention, which seems like a way to bypass the need to ratify the treaty in the first place. If the regulatory purposes of the treaty are based on the idea that all countries abide by the same binding international laws, accepting America's submission without them adhering to the treaty would seriously undermine the convention's legitimacy. If submitted, the review will not take place for decades either way, due to the volume of submissions around the globe. but for now, it's a step towards protecting their territory rights and future economic opportunities. As I said before, it's not just the United States making these kinds of moves. With the rapidly increasing value of critical minerals in the 21st century, coastal states have made it vital to employ scientific task forces to conduct surveys of their seabed and define their continental shelf boundaries before their neighbors do. In 2016, for example, Argentina attempted to define their continental shelf on the back of their own scientific research. The original submission to the CLCS included claims to the extended continental shelf around the Falkland Islands, South Atlantic Islands, and some Antarctic territory, which would have allocated an additional 656,000 square miles to the Argentine government. However, these claims were unsubstantiated, eventually being deferred by the CLCS because of the sovereignty dispute over the Falkland Islands. Both the UK and Falklands governments rejected the claims, in addition to the Chilean government, who downplayed the validity of Argentina's aspirations. Their claims to Antarctic territory also contradict aspects of the Antarctic Treaty, and the Chilean officials emphasized this in their response to the submission. Argentina was only able to get the CLCS to approve continental shelf claims in the undisputed areas, amounting to 630 square miles gained, a tiny amount compared to what they were aiming for. Chile, the UK, and Argentina will all attempt to expand their territories in this region where their jurisdiction claims intersect, making competition for deep-sea mining rights a primary source of geopolitical tensions for these countries going forward. In 2023, Nicaragua was also dealt a blow regarding claims in the Caribbean Sea surrounding the islands of San Andres and Providencia. The area is said to be rich in oil and natural gas, but the extension would have infringed upon Colombia's continental shelf, which is why the International Court of Justice ruled in Colombia's favor. These are just some of the many disputes and resolutions that revolve around the continental shelf. The race for resource exploitation on the seabed and its subsoil is heating up all around the globe, and the successful claimants will reap the rewards if they can justify their assertions along the intricate and stringent parameters of the treaty. Portugal has also made a high-profile submission to the CLCS back in 2009, for which the legal process is still ongoing, laying claim to over 770,000 square miles, which would double its territory, making it one of the largest countries in the world, yet only a tiny fraction of it being land. More specifically, the maritime area would be 40 times larger than its terrestrial area. Known as the Mar Portugal Action Plan, Portugal intends to enhance their soft power in the Atlantic with this new territory. The archipelagos of Madeira and the Azores are key to their claims, because archipelagos, like these ones, given how far they are from mainland Portugal, are separate from a coastal state's baseline. This provides a state with another baseline from which they can claim extended continental shelf territory. If their submission is successful, they will seek to construct new facilities for communications, scientific research, shipyards, ports, and much more. The new ports would be capable of receiving large international cargo carriers, reinforcing Portugal's role in the key global shipping networks that run through their exclusive economic zone. And this isn't even including the alleged mineral-rich soils of the mid-Atlantic ridge near the Azores archipelago. These are the kind of economic advantages that extended continental shelf claims can provide, and the importance of these developments cannot be understated. It is clear from America's proposal that they are planning to dominate the Arctic seabed around them, not alone, as there has been plenty of cooperation between the Arctic Ocean states, but they will nevertheless control a meaningful portion of the seabed under the new boundaries. A wide array of economic and strategic possibilities has been opened up with this additional territory. The new borders would allow the US to protect potentially lucrative seabed territories for future exploitation. As the Arctic ice melts due to rising global temperatures, new areas of exploration become available that were previously inhospitable to industrial occupation. The current administration has made domestic research and manufacturing of semiconductors a central tenet of their regime. The US CHIPS and Science Act was passed in 2022, with one fundamental goal: to help the US wean themselves off of China's abundant mineral resource supply, as well as to compete with the Chinese semiconductor industry going forward. As the era of globalization comes to an end and new security conflicts manifest all around the globe, a turn towards protectionism has characterized the United States' economic policy in many respects. It seems the semiconductor industry and acquisition of critical minerals is best kept domestic, given the enormous importance of having a secure supply chain of these resources, in a world where our most fundamental technologies rely on their availability. Everything from smartphone and electric vehicle batteries to solar panels and military technologies like radar require minerals like lithium, cobalt, chromium, etc., all of which will only grow in demand as countries transition to clean energy sources in order to appease global calls to reach net zero emissions by 2050. As the world increases its reliance on solar and wind energy, as well as electric vehicles, we must begin scaling up the production of green technologies drastically. Estimates suggest that global demands for critical minerals may rise by as much as 400 to 600% in the coming decades. For example, the US solar industry plans to supply 30% of the country's energy generation by 2030. The minerals and metals used to produce solar panels include silicon, copper, silver, and aluminum, all of which can be found through deep-sea mining. China currently produces 70% of the world's polysilicon, and the region of Xinjiang alone produces 45% of this global supply. If the US wants to shift rapidly towards these clean energy sources, these are the kinds of deep-sea mineral deposits they must find in order to address this disparity, especially for minerals like lithium, the demand for which may grow by 4,100% by 2040, and the demand for cobalt, which is expected to grow by 2,000%, according to the International Energy Agency. Cobalt-containing battery chemistries accounted for 74% of the global electric vehicle battery market in 2021, and the Arctic crust around Alaska, particularly to the south, has crucial cobalt-rich crusts. China is leading the field in the terrestrial mining of these minerals. By dominating the mineral extraction and mining sector on land, China can disproportionately impact the raw material side of the semiconductor industry, and naturally this is a predicament for the US. If the US is lucky enough to discover lumps of critical minerals within their newly claimed territory, it will be a huge boost to their clean energy transition and their goal of independence from China in this particular sector. But the natural resource benefits of this new expansion are not only based on these strategic minerals. At the present moment, oil and gas are still king in the global energy market, and the Arctic has a vast untapped potential when it comes to these precious commodities, with the US Geological Survey estimating that America's newest territory claims they may contain 90 billion barrels of oil. No official bilateral agreement has been established between the US and Canada regarding their intersecting Arctic territories, and the US extended continental shelf boundaries does overlap with Canada's own potential claims. If a rich oil or gas deposit is discovered in the overlap zone before a bilateral agreement is achieved, it could be an area of tension for the North American states. Energy competition is a fundamental aspect of geopolitical relations, and the recent US territorial claims are indicative of this constant struggle. Then there's the case of the potential responses from the international community regarding the US decision to unilaterally claim land, especially from Russia and China. While the proposed ECS technically doesn't conflict with the 1990 Bering Strait Accords with the Soviet Union on the maritime boundary that runs across the Bering Strait, it hasn't been received well. Russian politicians have already accused the US of breaking international law, as reported by the, Russian state-owned news agency TASS. Meanwhile, the precedent that this sets for the other superpowers, namely China, is problematic. China won't be thrilled by America's continuing push to secure their own mineral supply chains. But worse than this is the fact that if the US act selfishly in their territorial expansion, China can justify the same moves for themselves. They can continue the construction of islands and other tactics to strong-arm their way to victory in their own territorial disputes with countries like Vietnam, Japan, and the Philippines in the South China Sea. If the US doesn't play by the rules, then why should they? Speaking of rival powers, exploration of this new land is also needed in order to devise a comprehensive strategic framework for the region's future. Beyond the economic possibilities, the security strategy of the United States has also been expanded in this area. Part of the United States' national strategy for the Arctic between 2022 to 2032 is to invest in infrastructure, such as the development of a deep draft harbor in Nome, as well as small ports, airfields, and other structures in the state of Alaska. The projection of US power and fortification of their military presence in the Arctic is the first pillar in the executive summary of their Arctic strategy, as outlined in their new Arctic strategy, and the ECS claims are clearly part of these developments. In the end, the US, arguably the strongest country in history, gaining another 386,000 square miles of territory, albeit way out in the high seas, is immeasurably beneficial for them, only reinforcing their dominance even more. The announcement regarding their ECS, even though not a member of the convention, could indicate a shift for the US towards acceptance and ratification of the UNCLOS treaty, or it could be a ploy to maximize their territorial rights without officially being subjected to the regulations that everyone else is playing by. Only time will tell how accepting the international community, or more importantly, their geopolitical rivals, will be of the decision. For the moment, the only definite result is that the inevitable US expansion train rolls on, and there's no indication that this is the last stop. Thank you for watching. And again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox now by using my link in the video description below. See you in the next one.